Once again, welcome to our program this evening for the Coastal Mountains Land Trust series. We're going to be learning about common loons, and I am going to turn the program now over to Ryan Gates from Coastal Mountains Land Trust to introduce our presenter this evening. Ryan.
Good evening, everybody. Kind of hard to have a Zoom chat tonight. I told Lucas and Julie this just moments ago that it'd almost be better if it was snowing or raining. It's hard to have these chats when it's so beautiful outside, but nevertheless, the show must go on, some may say. So, yeah, I'm from the Land Trust. Coastal Mountain Land Trust serves 15 different communities up and down Western Penobscot Bay. So, from here in Rockport all the way up to Prospect and inland as far as Knox. And the Land Trust was established in 1986, and all said we have about 12,000 plus acres under conservation. Most recently, our Round the Mountain Trail has opened up on Ragged Mountain, and that's a large project for us. And there's been a lot of community support around that. And yeah, I mean, that's who we are as a Land Trust. We're happy to be in this community and a member of the community, and that's how we act. So also, I'd like to introduce Lucas Savoy. He's from Biodiversity Research Institute. Lucas has a BS in Environmental Studies, Wildlife Biology and Management from Unity College. He joined Biodiversity Research Institute in 2000 as a wildlife research biologist. Early in his career, he focused primarily on common loon containment and breeding ecology field studies across North America, while also developing an interest in waterfowl conservation. He's currently the director of the waterfowl program and has focused his research on numerous species of waterfowl. He's also the acting director for Biodiversity Research Institute's Loon program and co-director for the Center for Waterbird Studies. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Lucas. Welcome, Lucas.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, thanks for having me. We'll learn a little bit about some loon natural history. I already see some questions popping in pertaining to that, so I probably will be able to answer some of those questions within the first few slides. And then we're going to learn about a large project that we're working on to restore loons to southern New England. So I'm going to start in with sharing my screen and open my presentation here. Okay. So it's titled Restoring Common Loons to Southern New England, a 100-Year Absence. So this was a large-scale project that we embarked on a few years ago to restore loons to an area of southeastern Massachusetts where they once existed and no longer do. They've been vacant there for over 100 years. And so I'm going to get into some of the nuts and bolts on why we're doing that, what it entails, and some other interesting, I think, loon facts for you all. So as Ryan mentioned, I work for a nonprofit, Biodiversity Research Institute, BRI for short, established in 1998. We're based in Portland, Maine, and we have a staff of about 40 wildlife biologists, and we study all sorts of critters: loons, bats, waterfowl, songbirds. The researchers here have specialty in a wide variety of research. And we work a lot with our federal and state agencies here within the state and also across New England and throughout North America, really, to work on projects that can kind of help answer some of their questions on how to manage certain wildlife species. So our talk here tonight is focused on the common loon. So our organization, to give you a little background, has extensive research and experience with common loons. Our current director worked on his PhD project out in the Midwest in Michigan, and starting in 1989, and he developed a way to reliably and safely catch common loons. So that was never done before until he started his PhD work, and we're still doing that to this day. We've captured over 6,000 loons throughout North America since then. Working a lot, as I mentioned, with state and federal, some tribal, some industry. We even work internationally. We work with colleagues in Iceland on loons, and I had the privilege of a few years ago to travel to Arctic Russia to work with the Russian scientists to teach them how to catch loons there. and initiate some programs with those folks. And our overall goal of these projects is to further all of our knowledge in loon natural history, monitor population trends, determine threats for loons, and how do we conserve loons. So as far as catching loons, we call it capture and banding. We typically go out at night on the breeding lakes here throughout North America, and we use a bright spotlight and a large dip net. The loons have to have babies in order to catch them. We're basically acting as an intruding loon, and the adults will swim towards your boat to protect their young, and we safely scoop them up in the net and bring them in the boat with us. And when we have them in the boat, we place these color bands on their legs, the upper photo there, upper small photo. And each loon, we place 2 bands on each leg, and each loon has its own unique combination. So there's no loons that have the same 2 color patterns. It's a way that we can individually mark a bird. And so we can track that individual over time. Is it returning to the same wake? Is it mating with the same mate? How many chicks is it producing in its lifetime? How old is it? That sort of thing. And then we also, a lot of our research requires the collection of tissues. So we collect a lot of samples, blood and feather samples, and look at all sorts of things, contaminants, genetics, that sort of thing. And these photos here show a loon that we have banded and released. And so the reason why we band this bird is now we can track that bird over time. We never have to catch it again. Once we let it go, we take advantage of the loon's natural behavior. This is called a foot waggle. That you folks familiar with loons have probably seen this, where they thermoregulate their body temperature by extending their leg way up in the air and stretching out. And that gives us a great opportunity to determine what color bands are on that loon and who that individual is. And some of the interesting findings through this banding effort over the years, we've determined that loons typically do not get their traditional breeding plumage. So that bottom photo there, their traditional black and white plumage that you all see during the summertime, that's their adult plumage. And then the top photo, this is actually a photo of a really large chick. It's in its first summer, hasn't migrated yet. But in the winter, the adults will lose all their black and white feathers and molt in this new feather pattern. And they look a lot like this top photo during the winter months. So chicks usually don't get that black and white until they're at least 2 years old. And a loon typically will not breed until it's on average 6 years old. The youngest loon that we know of that has attempted to breed was 4, and the oldest was 11. And that's first time breeding. And the average is about 6. So loons will get their adult plumage, maybe come back to freshwater lakes at 2 or 3 years of age, but not able to secure a mate or breeding territory for a couple more years at least. And when they come back, they don't go far. Adult loons are homebodies. They usually will only disperse within about a mile or 2 from the area that they occupied the previous season, their territory. And we are able to track the longevity record too. We have some loons that are currently alive that are at least 34 to 35 years old. We say at least because, as we mentioned, they don't breed until an average of 6 years old. And some of these loons that we're tracking were captured as adults. So we don't know how old they were when we captured them for the first time. They could have been, they probably were at least a minimum of 6 years old, but they could have been 12. So they're at least 34 to 35, but they easily could be in their 40s as well. So loons do have the ability to live a long time. And juvenile loons, so the loons that leave the summer lakes for the first time as a large juvenile, about half of those will return as an adult about 2 to 3 years later. So there's a high mortality. About half of them won't survive when they get to the ocean during their first winter, their first couple of winters. Ocean's a harsh place, and some loons don't make it. Some loons will get frozen in on the ice during the fall if there's an early ice in. But those juveniles that do return as adults, they explore a little bit more than an adult that has established himself already. The reason being is they're trying to find a home. They're trying to find a mate. They're trying to find a lake, a part of a lake where they can eventually nest and breed. So if everything is occupied, they may have to explore a little bit further. So they have a larger dispersal rate than an established adult loon. And through this banding and reobservation data, we're also able to figure out migration routes for common loons throughout North America. As I mentioned, a lot of loons will winter on the marine, on the ocean environment. Not always. Some loons will overwinter on large freshwater lakes, more southerly regions that do not freeze over, or large rivers, but the majority of them will winter on the salt water in the ocean near the coast. And as I mentioned, they turn that gray color. This photo here is of a loon on the ocean in late winter. So it's really starting to grow back its black and white feathering that you can see on its back. So it's caught in between that winter plumage and that winter and the breeding plumage. But you can look at its eye. It has that distinct red eye of an adult common loon, even throughout the winter. And so even in the winter time, we get these band recoveries. This was a photographer that sent us this photo. They tracked us down on our website and said, hey, I took a photo of a loon. It's got color bands. What can you tell me about this bird? And this particular bird, we banded as a breeding loon in the Adirondacks of New York, and it was wintering in Long Island Sound, New York. So these sort of things, we get lots of information. This is a map showing of all the locations we have of loons that were either reobserved on the ocean or were found dead on a beach by somebody walking the beach during the winter. And so it really allows us to figure out, where do loons go in the winter? Where are the hot spots? Where do they like to go? And how far south do they go? The very most southern dot is a loon that we banded on a breeding lake in Quebec, and it wintered off the Atlantic coast of Florida. So that was quite a long migration. Typically, our loons here in Maine will winter on the coast of Maine, downwards to Cape Cod area. The farthest south that we had a loon in Maine has been North Carolina, which is a definitely unique circumstance. Probably not many Maine loons get down that far. And so tying this into why are we translocating? Well, this is a historic range map of where loons used to breed and where they currently breed. So this darker tan color is where they used to breed as late as the late 1800s, early 1900s. And you can see in the east, they would breed in parts even of northeast Pennsylvania down into New Jersey, all throughout New York. And they don't breed there anymore. They're more, we have loons that breed in Massachusetts, and there's one breeding pair currently in Connecticut, no breeding pairs in Rhode Island, and none in New Jersey, none in Pennsylvania. So there is a range retraction. Same in the West. Loons used to breed as far south as Northern California and throughout Oregon. And they don't breed in those areas any longer. And we tried to figure out, before we started this loon translocation project, we tried to figure out, are the loons genetically different throughout North America? So this is a quick little researchy map here just to show you. The different colors just show you that the loons from these subgroups are genetically distinct. So loons in New England, New York, and Eastern Canada are all very similar genetically, but they differ from birds in Ontario. They differ from birds in the provinces of Canada, more in the central part. So loons do have some distinct genetic population. So this ties into loon translocation. So what is loon translocation? It's the process of moving wild, healthy loons, in our case chicks, large loon chicks, from stable population to areas that are slow to recover naturally. As I mentioned before, loons do not disperse well. They're not great explorers. So if they are removed from an area like they were in Massachusetts about 100 years ago, it takes forever for them to get back. So translocation is a way for us to help that population get back to its normal breeding range quicker. And so why are we translocating loons? As I mentioned, they were prominent throughout southern New England and not so much anymore. They were wiped out really over the collection of eggs. Folks were eating loon eggs, but also collecting loon eggs in the museum. But mostly they were killed through sport and through competition. Loons, as you know, eat fish. So the fishing communities wipe them out over competition for their fish. And the reason why we want to restore them is they once existed, humans wiped them out, and they have a cultural value too. The state agencies view them as very important species for our society. People are really drawn to loons, just like eagles. They're kind of an appealing species. And they were there naturally on their own, and we kind of made them disappear. So we're trying to bring them back to some of these areas. And so why do we move loon chicks versus an adult loon? Well, adult loons have really strong fidelity to their established breeding lake. So if we went to Maine and caught an adult loon and drove it to Massachusetts and let it go, it would eventually find its way back. Maybe not that season, but certainly the next spring, it would be back on that lake. It already knows how to get back and forth from that lake. Where loon chicks migrating from their lake, they've never experienced migration before. So our hypothesis is that we could take a loon chick, catch it that was born in Maine, drive it to Massachusetts, rear it, and I'll get into that process, and let it go, and it'll return back to where we let it go versus where it was born. But we didn't know this. This is just our hypothesis. And so this brought us into phase one, the development of a loon translocation technique. So during 2015 to 2017, we received funding to develop this technique to see if it even works. So what we did over those course of 3 years is we captured 24 loon chicks from either New York or Maine combined and brought them to Massachusetts to rear them. And I'll get into that process here in a minute. And it worked very well. We had a 100% success rate, meaning that none of the loon chicks that we translocated suffered any sort of mortality. They all survived to be released and fledged to leave the lake in the fall. And then as of 2019, we had 6 of those returning back, which is a very similar proportion of loons returning that we typically see in the wild. So we were really, really excited about that. And so we felt really good about this technique. It was a viable technique to translocate loons, and we published a paper on that technique. And it brings us to phase two. Why would we implement this other than to restore loons to their historic range? Well, as you know, certainly more recently in 2010, there was a Deepwater Horizon oil spill that was terrible and killed thousands and thousands of birds. But even before that, there's been a couple oil spills in our New England area in Buzzards Bay. In 2003, Buzzards Bay, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, there was an oil spill called the Bouchard Barge 120 or B120. And it killed over 500 common loons that were wintering on the ocean. Happened in I believe it was March. And so it was a process. When this happens, it's a process between the federal agencies, the Fish and Wildlife Service. They meet with the responsible party, the oil spill folks, and they decide, how much money, what's the extent of the oil spill, how many birds died, and they scale that effort to say, okay, this is how much money we're asking for to put towards bird conservation. And so during this process, they agreed to focus on common loons because that was the species of bird that was most lost, and to focus on areas of New England and New York. And these agencies, as I mentioned, are comprised of federal and state. So it happened in Massachusetts or Rhode Island borders. So their state agencies were involved, Mass DEP and Mass Wildlife, and Rhode Island DEM. And then the 2 governing federal agencies, Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA, were also involved in this process. And they really liked the idea of translocating loons as a viable method to restore bird years lost. They knew the technique worked from our work, and they wanted to continue on that. They wanted to build upon that effort as a way to restore loons through the oil spill. So we started this project again last year in 2020, and we will be doing it again this year in southeastern part of Massachusetts. And then we'll move to the Berkshires, the western part of the state, for 3 years, starting in 2022 to the same technique there.
Lucas, we had a question that came in. When you move the chicks, are you also moving them with the parents, or are they stable and able to be without their parents at that point?
That's right. And I'll get into that a little bit more, but to answer your question, no. We just take a chick. We always focus on a pair of loon that has 2 chicks, and we take one of the 2 chicks. We won't take a chick from a pair that only has 1 chick. We always focus on a 2-chick brood and take one. And I'll get into that actually in a couple more slides here too.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. So why Massachusetts? They were completely wiped out statewide, completely wiped out by the turn of the 20th century, 1900. And the very first loon, it took 75 years for the very first loon pair to establish themselves in Massachusetts. So it took 75 years for loons to make it back to Massachusetts. And since that occurred in 1975, and it happened on Quabbin Reservoir, which is in the central part of the state. And now there's upwards of 48 pairs. So really there's still not a lot of loon pairs. In comparison, Maine has about 1,700 loon pairs. Obviously, many more lakes here in Maine than Massachusetts. But Massachusetts does have the ability to support anywhere from most likely 150 or maybe even 200 pairs of loons. So they have a long way to go. And the Massachusetts considers the loon a species of conservation concern. And this quick little chart here just shows you that growth curve. So the top line is the number of territorial loon pairs in Massachusetts from 1985 to 2020. We're upwards of 48 pairs here. So a steady increase, but it just takes time. It takes a lot of time to bounce back. And this map here just shows you the cluster. So the red dots are lakes with loon pairs. And you can see the majority of the loon pairs are focused in that central part of the state. And that's where that very first pair came back in 1975. There's a lot fewer pairs in the Berkshires, and even less pairs in the very southeast portion of Massachusetts where they once existed. So they're all clustered here, and they're having problems dispersing. So our translocation project is helping them disperse. So when we translocate loons, as I mentioned, we target loon pairs with 2 chicks. We wait until the chicks are at least 5 weeks of age. Closer to 6 is even better. That's the minimum age. And that's an age where loon chicks are starting to grow. They're starting to lose some of their brown baby down, like this little guy. You can't really see well, but he's starting to get some of his juvenile gray feathers on his back and his rump. And at this age, a loon chick 5 or 6 weeks old has the ability to catch fish on their own. They prefer to get food from their parents if they can, but if their parents aren't available, they will eat fish on their own. So we bring them to these pens. We have 3 pens in Massachusetts. There's 1 chick per pen, and we line the outside of the pens with this fabric, so the live fish that we provide to them can't escape. They're in there for the loons to catch and pursue. And it's also a way for to limit disturbance. They're calmer if they can't see out and if things can't see in. The lake that we chose here in Massachusetts is a private lake. There's no access to the public, so there's no boats out here. There's no canoeing. There's no kayaking. So it really offers a really safe place to rear these loons, because once we let them go on this lake as well, and they rarely will encounter any human risk. There is some fishing allowed from the shoreline kind of thing, but it's a really ideal place. As I mentioned, we identified 2 chick broods. We take 1 of them. And once we catch them, we put them in these specially designed tubs. It has an elevated bottom to keep them dry and also protect them from hurting themselves. And they're immediately evaluated by a wildlife veterinarian, just to make sure that they have functioning wings, functioning legs, their eyes look good. We take a blood sample, a pre-translocation blood sample, where we're looking at different stress parameters. And then they're immediately driven to Massachusetts. We put them in a car in this tub. We crank up the air conditioning to keep it cool. Loons do better in a cool environment. And the car ride is about 2.5 hours to the site in Massachusetts. And they're brought to the pens that night. And then we have crews that are at these pens daily, sun up to sundown, the whole time the loons are in the pen. In this far right photo, you can see there's a white tube, white PVC tube extending down, and that's where the crew will boat on the outside of the pen with live minnows several times a day and dump them into that tube. So there you can see the loon is just to the right of that tube. So all the live fish come out of that tube, and once the fish hit the water, the loons dive right away and start catching fish. And we typically keep the loon chicks in the pen until they're usually between 9 and 10 weeks old. At that point, they're almost capable of flight. Loon chicks can usually fly between 10 and 12 weeks of age, closer to 12 usually. So they're almost ready to fly, and they're really adept at fishing. We keep them in the pen until they're very, very proficient at catching fish. So when we let them go, they can instantly start catching wild fish. So we call that pen rearing. And the other translocation method we use is we catch older chicks on their natal lakes in Maine. And these are chicks that are at least 9 weeks old, closer to 10, maybe even 11 weeks old. So they don't need to go in the pen. We catch them, we transport them to Massachusetts, and we directly release them to the lakes because they're already old enough to catch fish right out of the gate on their own in the wild. So it's a combination of pen rearing birds until they're old enough and then direct release. And the reason why we do the pen rearing is the younger the loon chick, the easier it is to catch. As these loons start getting to be 9, 10 weeks old, they can be very difficult to catch. They're very, very good divers. So really to maximize the number of loons that we can move, it's better to move loon chicks that are easier to catch. We rear them in a pen until they're ready, and then we let them go. They're custom designed pens. They're placed in the spring. We'll go out really in the summer. We typically we'll go down there in early July to erect the pens. They're made out of this metal fencing. As I mentioned, it has this aquaculture netting on the inside to prevent the minnows from swimming out. And then we put a mesh over the top. And this is to keep out birds, eagles, owls, gulls, that sort of thing. So nothing can get into this cage, mammal or bird. The water depth is about 5 to 6 feet. We get the pen out as far in the water as we can. And as I mentioned, the crew's down there sun up to sundown daily, 7 days a week, while the loons are in the pen feeding them live fish and doing behavioral observations. How many fish do they catch, and that sort of thing. This is just another photo to show the back side of the pens from the lake. You can see the little wooden panels is where the crew will dock the boat, so the loons can't see the crew in the boat, and then they'll feed the loon chicks live minnows through the piping. And in total, so far we've translocated 36 loon chicks. We plan to translocate upwards of 12 more this summer. And part of our project too is looking how many loons come back and who they are. So we ban the loons upon release. We ban the loons so they have their own individual numbers. And so we're able to tell, if a loon comes back and who they are. So we have summer crews down there that'll be starting early May, and they'll be doing that every day. We're up to I believe 10 or 11 loon chicks total now, out of the original 24 that would be coming back as adult loons at this point. The loons that we reared last year are only a year old now. So we don't expect to see them yet, at least for another year. And of these birds that we've translocated, two pairs have formed. And last year was very exciting. 2020, for the first time ever in this area in over 100 years, the male of a translocated bird that we brought down there paired with an unbanded female. We're not sure where she came from. She was probably a bird that was either drawn in seeing loon activity here, or just a bird that dispersed a little farther than normal, but it's an unbanded female paired with the banded translocation male, and they nested and hatched a chick and fledged it actually. So this was the first record of nesting in that area of Massachusetts in over 100 years. And that male was 5 years old. He was translocated in 2015. So last year in 2020, when he bred for the first time, was a 5-year-old bird. And we made a visit to that site in July. The chick was about 2 weeks old when we made the visit, and we wanted to ban the female to see if that mate would be back again this year. It was a purpose of banning her. And we also wanted to collect blood and feather samples to look at various contaminants and basically some health checkups. And same technique that we use in Maine. We get there in the daylight. We get the boat ready. This particular lake that they're residing on is a water supply. So again, there's no access. It's fantastic. There's no boats allowed. We got special permission from the water supply manager. He came with us to perform the capture. We used an electric motor. And this is a picture of the loon in the spotlight right before we netted it. This upper right photo is the pair of loons that you can see in the middle of the spotlight as we're approaching them for capture. And we color banded the female. The female leg is on the right. Those are new bands. And the male that was translocated is on the left. So those are 5-year-old bands. They were in really good condition. So we kept those on that bird. And as I mentioned, we're going to continue this project here again in 2021. It's going very well. The trustees are ecstatic that a pair established themselves, 2 pairs established themselves, and one has already produced a chick. So we're trying to achieve a sample size of around 50 translocated loons. And we feel strongly at that point, the proportion of loons coming back, they will be able to sustain themselves, and that population will continue to grow in southeastern part of Massachusetts. There's lots of lakes there, lots of water supply lakes actually that have restricted access. So it's actually an ideal place for loons to come back to. They stand a really good chance of restoring themselves. And as I mentioned, we're going to duplicate this effort starting in 2022 in the western part of Massachusetts in the Berkshires. And the long-term goal, we're working with the state agencies, Mass Wildlife, and at the conclusion of our project, Mass Wildlife staff will take over the loon monitoring. And so they'll continue to check these for years and years and years to see how many of these translocated loons are coming back and how many are nesting. So this project will have a life after we're done. And we're also working on, we do this a lot in Maine. Some folks may have seen this. We deploy artificial nesting platforms on some of the lakes that experience water level fluctuations. This is just a way for loons to help them nest successfully so their nests don't get flooded or stranded if the water level goes down. And it also prevents mammals from getting, they can get out here, like a mink or a raccoon can swim. They can get out there if they want to, but they, it limits the number of nests that get predated by mammals as well. And we're also working with the state agencies and lake associations and water supply managers to get the word out about how do you live with loons. Folks in Maine, you know, loons have been here forever. We know how to live with loons for the most part here in Maine, but keep in mind, these areas of Massachusetts, some of these people have never seen a loon before. They've never seen a loon out kayaking, out boating. So we're really trying to educate them on, you know, how do you interact with a loon that's breeding when they're on nests? Give them space, look for certain postures that they may be displaying that may indicate that they're stressed. So we develop a lot of these outreach materials that go to the state agencies that get handed out to lake associations and the general public. And of course, here in Maine, everyone's familiar with lead tackle is no good for loons. It's lethal. So we're spreading that word as well in Massachusetts in our project areas to try to limit that issue. And then also building citizen science is important. We have citizen scientists all over North America that are, I get probably every week, I get a photo from somebody. Hey, saw this loon birding, took a photo of it with a really nice camera. We noticed it has leg bands on it. We tracked you down on the website. So really incredible, valuable information. And we're really trying to get the word out about this project too. So if someone can get band returns on a translocation bird, that's great information. And we have a specially designed website where you can report a loon, banded loon. There's an easy form there to fill out. We get lots of information that way. And this photo was just on Monday, from one of our citizen scientists down in Southeast Massachusetts took this photo, said the loons are back, the ice went out, the loons are back. And you can see this is its right leg, it's 2 white bands over it. And so we're able to identify this is a male loon that we translocated in 2015, and he just arrived back on Monday. So he's a 6-year-old loon at this point. So he has a very good chance if he can find a mate to begin breeding this year. So we'll keep an eye out for this guy. Lots of project partners, as I mentioned, the Fish and Wildlife Service and Mass Wildlife, as well as the Assawampsett Pond Complex is the area that we're translocating loons to. They're incredibly helpful. And of course, Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife here in the state of Maine. And this is a great photo here of a loon chick. We had a GoPro camera under the water at one of the rearing pens. This is another way that we keep track of how successful loons are at catching fish underwater. When we can't see them, we'll deploy these GoPro cameras. So this is a great photo showing a loon chick in front of the camera. Again, just a recap of the agencies involved. And there's been a ton of people involved with this project over the years, and we couldn't do it without these folks. So just a thank you to all these folks and many more too. And Yeah, that's all the slides that I have for you this evening.
Well, we have a number of questions that
All
came
right.
in. That was really fascinating discussion of the process. We had some questions coming in about the problems that caused the reduction of the population in the first place. Can you talk a little bit about which of those problems have been resolved and which are still battling? I know that you mentioned that lead tackle elimination is a big deal. What about fishermen continuing to kill them?
Yeah, so that's done now. So loons are protected species. They're a migratory species, so they're protected federally. So there's no hunting season on loons. The only loons that can be hunted are in Arctic Canada, Arctic Alaska. The native folks can still harvest loons, but that doesn't have any association with our loons here in New England. So there's maybe the occasional take from an accidental shooting during duck hunting season or goose hunting season or something, but that's very rare. The big things, the lead tackle and boat strikes actually are probably another leading cause of loon death on the breeding area. So Maine Audubon and Maine Department Inland Fisheries are very active in trying to get the word out about, boating safely, jet skiing safely, water skiing safely, and also the lead tackle.
Sarah says, I'm sad to see that some summer visitors set off firecrackers that frighten away the loons in Spruce Head. Does something like that end up causing them to relocate, or would they come back after the frightening sounds are stopped?
They probably would come back, but it could be a reason why a loon maybe abandons a nest. If there's repeated disturbances, loons will abandon their nest, especially early on when they first lay their eggs. They're not quite as attached to their eggs. They haven't invested a ton of time into it. Typically incubation for a loon is about 30 days. So they'll sit on eggs for about 30 days until the babies hatch. So yeah, fireworks can be an issue. Constant disruption, especially during early incubation, could cause a loon to abandon a nest. They probably wouldn't leave the lake, but they may abandon nesting that season.
Okay, well, speaking of nesting, this is a question that I find really interesting because it's about twins, and I have twins. It says, we have a nesting pair on our pond that had twins last year in early July. One of the twins attacked the other one, and apparently the parents did not intervene over a couple days, and one of the babies did not survive. Is this a common phenomena when there are two? And I must say, as a human parent with twins, we generally don't let it go that far.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's very common in loons. Actually, we call it sibling rivalry. So loons are asynchronous hatchers. So one day an egg number one is laid one day, egg number two is laid the next day, and so they typically hatch a day apart as well, or definitely several hours apart. So the first chick hatch has the advantage, believe it or not. Even just a day or even 12 or 14 hours, it has that advantage. They're getting food right out of the gate. They're typically bigger, so it's not uncommon for the firstborn chick actually to beat up on its sibling, and it sometimes can lead in death. Yes.
Yeah, survival of the fittest, I guess, amongst the twins.
Yeah.
We have some questions about the relocating them to Massachusetts. So Liz asks, with global warming, will most loons eventually go north to cooler climes? Sending chicks south seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, we thought a lot about that actually, and we're still discussing this with all of our New England loon groups too. We're confident that loons will adjust. Believe it or not, they are a northern species. But for instance, in Massachusetts, we had a loon pair last year that they started nesting the end of April. By May 20th, they hatched chicks. So we feel like, and the year before, they nested about 2 or 3 weeks later than that. So we felt like that might be a good example of ice is going out earlier, loons are returning earlier. Typically loons will return after ice out, but not nest for maybe 2, 3, upwards of 4 weeks. They're probably getting healthy again, getting back into the freshwater habitat, but they're arriving earlier. So it may allow them to nest earlier actually when it's cooler versus nesting in June, or July when it's hotter. Maybe they'll be nesting in May where it's cooler. And typically warmer lakes actually are more productive as far as fish. So the colder, more northerly lakes aren't as productive. that's called ligotrophic lake. You know, they're deeper, they're colder, and they're less productive. There's less food there actually. So warmer waters may actually provide more of a food source for loons. So yeah, it's been a hot topic. Some folks in Ontario actually just published a paper on, they have a 25 or 30-year data set of loon monitoring in Ontario. And they're finding water levels, temperatures increasing, but loon productivity is also increasing. So there's this correlation between increasing water levels and more loon chicks are surviving. So it's counterintuitive. But it's possible that global warming, climate change may not be bad for loons.
I guess time will tell. We do have, kind of a play on that same question. Why take them to Massachusetts? Why not leave them in Maine? Are you getting any pushback about taking away from the Maine population of loons, or is it a healthy enough population?
Yeah, we do have so forums like this is great outreach. Actually, we do a lot of talks with lake associations and talk with folks about this very thing. And Maine Inland Fisheries and Wildlife is supportive and helps us as well. Maine has a very stable loon population. As I mentioned, there's about 1,700 pairs or so in the state. So 3,400 adult loons. We call them buffer populations. So when you see extra loons on lakes, that means there's unpaired adults around, which means that the population's healthy. That means there's so many loons there that they're not all paired up. So we see that a lot, especially here in southern Maine. And so, yeah, most areas of Maine have very healthy populations of loons. And we're taking such a small percentage of that population. If this went on for 50 or 100 years, that's different, but for 5 or 6 years, it's really not, it really won't impact a healthy Maine population.
Thank you for clarifying that and giving us that perspective. I think you might have mentioned this, but maybe a little more clarification. What's the survival rate of the transported chicks?
Currently they're about 40, 44, 45% of the, we don't know about the survival rate, but the return rate, about half of the loon chicks that we let go between 2015 and 2017. About half of those chicks we've seen returning.
Norman mentions in David Thoreau's book, Walden Pond, that location supposedly had loons when he lived there. And he also says that bald eagles attacked our resident pair's nest on Daramuscata Lake last year, and the year before a nighttime animal attack took the eggs. Can you talk a little bit about what some of the natural predators are of the loons?
Yeah, eagles are become a hot topic actually. Yeah, it's a good thing, right? It's a good, I guess it's a good problem to have. Eagles have rebounded really well. Their population's booming, and eagles like to eat loon chicks for sure. They like waterfowl, they like loon chicks. So I think now that the eagle population has grown, we're going to see more and more of this. But that's probably how it was, a couple hundred years ago too, when eagle populations were booming, or before the DDT days. So I think that'll all balance out, I think. But we are getting more reports of loons, of eagles eating loons, and same in the western part of the country too, Washington and Montana, Wyoming, where loons also breed. Eagles have also rebounded there, and they're seeing more and more eagle-loon interactions there too. So yes, and then other predators, mink and raccoons love loon eggs. We put out these trail cameras on some loon nests throughout the state too, and we get a lot of mink on camera, a lot of raccoon, even ravens. If a loon leaves a nest, a raven would come in and grab an egg. And folks in the Adirondacks, where there's lots of black bears, they get a lot of black bears on their trail cameras, flushing a loon off a nest and eating loon eggs.
Oh. Jennifer has a really great question, especially for anyone here in the tourism industry. She says, is there a website link where I can print out educational materials about loons? We have a lot of people renting camps on our pond that end up disturbing the loons.
Yes, so on our website, and I could, let's see, fast forward to the beginning here. I think think I have our website on our first slide. If not, yeah, so our website is briloon.org, and you can navigate on our website, and we do have a loon page, and those outreach materials that I showed you at the end, Living with Loons, we have all those available in a PDF format, so you can download those, print those out. Maine Audubon has a great website as well. They have a loon program at Maine Audubon with lots of literature on their website as well. So I would check out their website, and I'm sure they have downloadable PDFs as well that you can print. So yeah, between our organization and Maine Audubon, we work together a lot on these sort of things. There's a lot of good information there.
This is a fun question. I don't think we'll be able to unmute anybody, but does anyone have a really good loon call they can show? Are you able to do a loon call, Lucas?
I do. Yeah.
I don't mean to put you on the spot or anything.
I do it for my kids all the time. Let me take a drink of water here. All right, I'll try.
All right. Excellent. Thank you. That's far better than what I could do. That's great. Diane says she's curious why she sees loons on a tidal river.
Yeah, so loons will winter on the ocean, so they can adapt to salt water. They do adapt to salt water. They have salt glands that extract the salt, and they're able to ingest fresh water that way. So a lot of these loons that aren't old enough to migrate back inland yet, they're not old enough to breed, they're not fit enough yet to hold the territory or find a mate. Sometimes they'll live on the ocean year round. And they're probably in that tidal, they're non-breeding loons, probably in that tidal river, probably a good food source. There's probably a lot of fish. Loons on the marine environment too will eat green crabs, sea urchins. They have a pretty diverse diet on the wintering area. So it's probably a non-breeding loon in an area where there's lots of food.
Okay. So Deirdre says, if they abandon their eggs or their eggs don't make it to hatching, do they lay more? Yeah,
often they do. Typically, we've seen loon pairs nest upwards of 3 times within a season. Not terribly common, but a re-nest twice in a year is very common. So if that first nest fails, it really depends when in the season. If they nest June 1st or so, which is a common time of year here in Maine for loons to start nesting early June, and they make it, like it takes 30 days to hatch an egg, and they make it to like day 27 or 28 or even 29, and something happens and they lose their nest at the very last minute. They may not re-nest just because they invested so much time into that nest. They may not want to, nest again, but often they will re-nest. If the first nest fails, they will often re-nest within the same year.
Sue asks, if we have twins again, the Pond Association agrees, can we get in touch with you for relocating one?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have crews out. We have crews out usually starting in early June on lakes looking for nesting loons. And we look for those eventually. Once they start hatching, we keep track of pairs with 2 loon chicks. We try to follow them and make a list. And we always check with the state. We're in constant contact with the state. So we have an open dialogue with the state on what lakes we have found pairs with 2 chicks. And the state may say, you know what, that lake association is very touchy. Let's avoid that lake, that sort of thing. Like, I'll give a good example. Little Sebago Lake here down closer to us has lots of loons, but their lake association is very, very hands-off. We work with them a lot, actually, on loon projects, and so we recognize that, we respect that. So that's a lake that we don't attempt loon translocation captures on. But there's lots of lakes around. So. But if folks are willing to share that information, we're grateful.
Super, thank you. Norman says Damariscotta Lake will have daily gatherings of many unpaired loons, up to a dozen or more. That's really cool.
Yeah, you know what, Norman, I actually surveyed for the first time in my life. I actually visited Damariscotta Lake last summer with my family. We took a boat ride out there. We did some fishing. Beautiful lake, and I think there was 2 pairs maybe that we were kind of there later season, maybe early August. There was 2 pairs at the southern end near the boat ramp. There was a pair with a single chick, And then somewhere up mid-lake near some islands, there was another pair with a single chick. But I was surprised actually how many loons were out there and how few of them had chicks. I think those are the only 2 pairs that we saw that day that had chicks, and there were adults everywhere. But that time of year in August, it's when loons that are unsuccessful, their nests either failed or they lost their chicks, hatched and lost their chicks. They become more social, so they will gather like that. Early season they won't. They want to kill each other. So they're more segregated. They're in their pairs. They're more spread out. But as the summer goes later, birds that are unsuccessful in hatching young become more social, and they may gather like that.
Sometimes it's just hard to find a good girlfriend or a good boyfriend now these days. Okay, so Jerry asks, is it hard to live with loons? So you mentioned a couple issues that like fishermen have had in the past. What have been some of the other challenges? And, you know, of course, we'll mention the lovely sound that they make all night long.
Yeah. You know, it's hard because the loons choose beautiful places in the lake to nest and raise their young. They like to nest on islands if there's islands available. Islands draw people. People are drawn to islands for picnics, have a fire. So it can be difficult to live with loons, but if you get to know them a little bit, you just kind of have to give them their space. And they don't nest all summer. You know, you may lose your favorite cove or your island if you want to give them space for that 30 days, a month or something. And then they hatch their young, or they brood their young in a different cove, and then you can go into your favorite cove for fishing or your favorite island to visit for picnics. So yeah, it's just a matter of learning some of the loon behavior, when to give them space, and when it's okay to be in kayaking among loon pairs. After they hatch chicks, you know, some loon pairs are very tolerant to people coming in with kayaks and boats and fishing boats, and it's not an issue. It's just a matter of getting familiar with loon behavior and giving them their space.
Well, it sounds like you have some excellent resources for folks on the website you mentioned. I have one last question. Is a translocation program like this happening anywhere else in the country, or is this the only spot where this is being attempted?
Yeah, for loons, this is it. No one else is translocating loons. There's been a ton of success stories. Speaking of eagles, in Massachusetts, actually, Massachusetts lost all their eagles the same time that they lost loons. And they relocated eagles, bald eagles, to the state of the Massachusetts. They're booming now. They did the same thing with peregrine falcons. They translocated peregrine falcons to the state of Massachusetts. State of Maine does this with their shipping wild turkeys now actually to Texas, because parts of Texas had lost their wild turkey population. So different agencies will work with each other in different states to be like, hey, I'm hurting on turkeys. I know you got a bunch of them. Can you? I'll trade you some turkeys for fishers. You know, that trade happened way back actually between, I think, Maine and Massachusetts. We sent fishers to Mass, and they sent turkeys to Maine. So anyway, there are lots of wildlife translocation projects happening throughout the country, just not loons. This is the only place where it's happening with loons.
I've got a giant flock of Canada geese in my backyard in case anyone is looking for some. Thank you so much, Lucas. This was excellent, very informative, and we really appreciate you taking the time to tell us about common loons tonight. This was great.
You bet.
I want to encourage everyone who attended tonight to please join us again for future programs. You can find out about what's going on with the Coastal Mountains Land Trust by visiting their website, coastalmountains.org. You can visit our website, librarycamden.org, and check out all the great programs we have lined up on our events calendar. Again, we recorded this tonight, so if you enjoyed it and want to share the information with others, you can find the recording on the Camden Public Library Program's YouTube channel. All right, folks, go out and enjoy what's left of this beautiful evening tonight. And I wish you all the best. Be happy, be safe. See you soon. Bye, everyone.